Today, we have one of the top tier people that works on the Orville. He is the visual effects supervisor on the Orville, Brandon Fayette. How you doing today, Brandon?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Eric?
I'm doing great. So let's get right into the interview. I want to know a lot about your career. First off, how did you get started into visual effects?
Well, it's funny. I grew up in New Orleans and had watched movies my whole life. Big 80s movie fan. Love things like Star Wars, Last Starfighter, Goonies, Fly the Navigator, all great sci-fi tropes, sometimes Tron, depending on how I feel. I wanted to kind of work in that world, not just as a visual effects supervisor, but as a storyteller. So I, did the thing that's really hard to do and traveled to California with no connections and nobody to really meet and try to make it on my own in Hollywood. Ended up landing a job working with Jj Abrams at Bad Robot Productions, kind of back in the days when Lost was on, and did that whole ride for a while. I was the internal head of 3D and kind of like the guy that designed things from like the Bad Robot logo to the things in Bad Robot Workshop. And working with JJ and the wonderful people at Bad Robot, I ended up getting to work on everything from Super 8 to the Star Trek reboots. We did Star Trek Into Darkness, Star Trek Beyond, Mission Impossible, and then ultimately ended up doing Star Wars: The Force Awakens. And it was funny because when JJ and I were talking before everything got really big years ago, he's like, "Well, what got you into movies?" And I'm like, "Oh, Star Wars, man. Star Wars is always the thing." He's like, "Yeah, I love Star Wars." He's like, it stinks there's never going to be a new Star Wars. I'm like, yeah, I know, it sucks. And then all of a sudden, we end up doing this reboot, and love it or hate it, I think Force Awakens started this kind of new group of Star Wars shows from everything that Favreau is doing moving on. I left Bad Robot after almost a decade there and was trying to find worked on Patriots Day, a couple other like smaller movies. And then, Luke McDonald, who was the VFX supervisor on season 1 and season 2 of Orville, called me. He said, "Hey, do you want to work on a Seth MacFarlane show?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, cool." I was like, "I'm not going to do ships in space for a while. I've been doing ships in space way too long, and I take a break from ships in space." I'm like, "What is it about?" He's like, "Oh, it's like a Star Trek kind of show." And I'm like, "Okay." So I ended up going in pre-production. One of the first things they ended up hiring me to do was design the Krill ships, because no one had been able to kind of crack it. So my first task pre-season 1 was essentially designing. They had a version of the Orville, it was really rough. And then I ended up designing the Krill, the Mocklin, the Genesi, Prius ships, pretty much all of the Union cruisers, the Leviathan, Krill destroyers, Krill shuttles, Mocklin shuttles, pretty much anything that wasn't the Orville, I ended up taking over design for. So I became the guy that designed all of the ships. And then because I had on-set experience, when we started shooting season 1, for every episode except for the pilot, I'd come in and out for the pilot while Favreau was doing it. But I was kind of in the middle of ship design world with Kit and Stephen Lineweaver, and ended up just being the on-set person, doing everything from like the reference photography to kind of like telling stuff, "Oh yeah, you can't put the screen there, we got to move this here." And we also, in the first season, had designed this, we had this giant 140-foot screen that was on the bridge.
Okay.
And what we did with it is we used that screen to do interactive lighting. We were originally going to shoot on it. It was Jon Favreau and Jason Clark's kind of pitch to Seth to like use it kind of similar to what Mandalorian does. But the technology wasn't good enough when we started shooting the first 2 episodes, that we only really used it in season 1 for the stars, like the quantum stars and the sublight stars, because it would get strobing. But incidentally, that technology was what gave Favreau the impetus to do the stagecraft technology, which became part of Mandalorian and that big spiel. So it started first on Orville. Season 1, we also were very kind of like 90s Star Trek. Outside each one of the offices out of the med bay and all that was actually a giant black curtain with fiber optic lights. And I would 3D print these little cucalorises that we would rotate to change the pattern of the lights, and we would actually move the curtains on a motor. And that was actually how we ended up doing the sublight stars. Quantum stars, we did a blue screen, but we had 2 screens. We had the black screen for like station keeping, which is kind of like in orbit where the ship's not moving, and we had the motors for sublight. Medbay was always an issue because the motor was at the end of the track. We'd have to kind of move the angles because you wouldn't want to see the curtain disappear. So after I had done season 1 and doing the design work in season 1, I went through season 2, was kind of most of the on-set presence while Luke was dealing with the vendors. And then when season 3 came about in June 2019, was when Kit and I were the first 2 people back in the office for season 3. We're the only people in the Fox lot. It was like a ghost town. And I ended up taking over the show as the full visual effects supervisor.
Wow.
So what I have done in season 2 to season 3 is that everything from like the space battles and Identity Part 1 and 2, all of the ships in space action was kind of my baby. So I would go and I would actually take Seth's scripts, break them down, work with a previous team that we hired in-house, and direct all of it. And some of the shots I'd do myself. If it was like too hard to be like explaining it to the previous artist, I'm one of the few visual effects supervisors that works on the box and actually does still know how to do the tools and use the tools and work within the software. So my big thing was I just essentially, brought the storytelling to life. So in season 3, one of the things that we ended up doing was taking that idea of space battles and storytelling and moving it to kind of the next generation for Orville. So I'm really excited for you guys to see what happens in season 3, but imagine what you liked out of season 2 taken to like the next level. Because the big thing I'm known for in season 1 is the hug the donkey. When, the pilot, when he did that was my baby. I was like, oh, I'll do the hug the donkey. It's fun. But for season 2, season 3, the big thing I wanted to do was, tell a story in a way that the audience would understand it from visual effects point of view. So like most space battles you'll see in shows and TV and movies and so forth, it's like the people are inside or on the bridge and they're doing something and you cut outside, you don't know where you are, and there's just action happening and laser blast, and you cut back inside and like, we just have to do that. With Orville, what we did was we actually wanted the audience to go on the journey with us. We wanted to be as smart as our audience. So like in Identity and a couple different episodes, what we would do is we would actually take the space battles and make it so that you could follow along. So it might be like, oh, we're on a Kalon sphere as it's coming in a kamikaze run to, take out a Union cruiser, when all of a sudden that cruiser explodes. And through the explosion, we pan off and we see the Orville interframe and we follow the Orville. So I called it a handoff, where we would take one bit of a storyline action and bring you with it. So it's not just like, oh, the Orville's there. We actually introduce the Orville in the previous thought. So like, when Gordon comes out, like we're on the Krill in Identity Part 2, we're on the Krill destroyers and you're zooming in and you're seeing the cannons fired and the battle's happening. And all of a sudden a whole wave of Krill fighters drop down and they take off, and then we whip with one of them. That one that we whip with happens to be Gordon. Then we cut to the guy. So the big thing for me was always doing the storytelling for space battles, for anything, that's coming in season 3 that isn't space related. And taking what Seth, what John, what all the wonderful people on the show have been doing, directing, and tethering that energy and that sentimentality to the visual effects of the battles, and even the smaller moments, like with Priya, and we're seeing the planet kind of go, and we're trying to get to the drilling platform in time to save her, and making the visual effects also part of the story. So it's just one thing to have pretty explosions and lasers and spaceships, but also, so for example, and this is something, that might be useful even in a fan series, is you're shooting the bridge and you're on your captain standing stoically, kind of like, in the midst of it. This is a bad moment, and you're zooming in and the camera operator does a whip over to the side. That whip over to the side from right to left, we would pick up in visual effects and do a right to left whip in space and carry the move across, so that you're now introducing the ship flying through. And by doing little things like that, which nobody really notices, and working with Tom, we would cut this together in a way where it felt like one interconnected story. And I thought that was a really nice way to make a more modern interpretation of kind of like a 90s, early 2000s style, or late 80s, Star Wars, Star Trek style storytelling, and kind of bring it to the modern era. It's like, our audiences are with us. Let's take them on the journey together. Let's not just cut to space, and that was kind of one of the things that I think as a trope, we really were successful with in the second season of the show. Mm-hmm. And if you notice, between season 1 and season 2, we went, for season 1, we used, like, for example, we had this big ship, right? That was a physical prop. It was 3D printed on a Form 2 printer and an Objet Eden. And then it was painted and put together. and we shot it with motion control cameras from the 80s to get the intro shots and things like that. So people are like, oh, there's a physical model in the Orville. We used it for about 10% of the shots. It's mostly when the Orville went to quantum, things like that. And so what we ended up doing was, because we needed more motion than what the prop could do, we ended up doing a full digital version in season 1 that matched what the physical ship looked like. Now the physical ship is a couple of feet long. You can't get really small detail on it. It just doesn't hold up. Paint strokes, size of paint, it is what it is. So it had some proportion things I was never a big fan of. So for season 2, what we did was, okay, we recycled some of the motion control shots, but we upgraded the ship. We shrunk some windows, we shrunk some pieces, we made the panels a little bit nicer, and we would project the 3D ship on top of the practical ship and recreate those original shots when we used the can shots, the same shots of ship flying left to right. And there was a visual upgrade. That same pattern, spoiler alert, so to speak, is going to happen for season 3, where we're going to take what we did, same evolution from season 1 to season 2. At this point, fans have seen the bridge, right? They've seen the what the actual bridge looks like. The fact that this thing behind me, it now has a bigger visual screen, the Phoenix wall. It's actually 8 feet deeper. They pushed it back to make it work. So everything, has had upgrades. And one of the things that's great about taking a show and evolving it, and what Seth has allowed to have happen, is that for every season, you can see the show start to mature into what it wants to be. And I think, even watching where you went with your show, your fan series, which is something all of us who work on the show watch, it's the first episode, you kind of set a tone. And the second episode, you did the puppet story, which was really adorable, but was also fun. Is what I noticed was you put more backgrounds in, you put more visual effects in, you tried to show more of this world than just talking heads, right? And I think that's that evolution from what you started with to where you went, as a creator, as a director, as a storyteller, for the people that you work with on your crew and the people that I have the lovely pleasure to work with on Orville, that is something that is really, really wonderful. And I think, I'm fortunate because the team of people on the visual effects team are absolutely phenomenal. Brooke, Eric, Taylor, Adam, Chris, we had Delane, we have Lauren now, we have Peter and Ian and all of these wonderful people on our team. George, try not to forget anyone. Cynthia, who's new. Like, all of the people on our visual effects team are just top notch and the right group of people to really bring this show to life. Once season 3 premieres, I can tell you way more detail about what we've had to deal with.
Yeah, because we definitely want to bring you back.
We went in expecting to do 1 year of production, like a normal television show, right? I started in June of 2019. We're walking out of this probably hitting 3 years, about 3 years to actually do 1 season of television, which is unheard of. It's probably a record somewhere to do 3 years for 1 season, but we're at the point now where I think we can now be able to look at things in a different way, especially through the pandemic, and make a much stronger show of it. And I think for what you're doing with your show, because I know that when you're interviewing people, it's all about them and what they're doing, but I really want to bring this back to you a little bit and what you're doing. And one of the things I think that's really unique about Orville as a show, as a group of people, from Seth to Tom to all of us, is that we engage with our fans even while we're in the middle of doing our jobs. It's not like 10 years later at a Comic-Con where you're paying to get an autograph or talk to people. It's, Casarl, text people. We don't penalize the fans for having fun with the world. And I think that with your show, with what you're doing, the big thing I can see with Planetary Step is that you're having fun. And I think having fun is key, because look, the world, like, even when Seth and I have these conversations about things like, for example, New York, in future New York, in the Orville universe, is a beacon of hope, prosperity, and positivity. There's so many things out right now which are very like dystopian, dark, of that ilk. And I think what's nice about, Seth and what Orville does is we're doing that kind of Roddenberry sense of positivity in the future, that there's hope, there's something good down the line. And the other thing that's really nice about Orville is it's like, it's not limited to like one race or one creed or one gender. There's a very diverse group of people for the most part in the show. And I think having other creators and their way to interpret what we're doing with the show, and from the humor to the storytelling, I think that's a really cool thing that you guys are doing with, Planetary Step. And I think that's, for all of the interviews and chapters that you're doing, I think that people who are watching this should realize that Seth MacFarlane started making his own Star Trek fan film, right?
Yes, yep.
Because he wanted to be in Star Trek. And then he got to be in The Next Generation for an episode, right?
He was also in Enterprise.
Correct.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it was Enterprise, not Next Generation.
Yeah.
But then he now has the ability to make his version of what a Star Trek world is.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are many things in life, from Family Guy and things that got his way. Jj Abrams started doing Super 8 videos as a kid. And then he ended up being the guy that got to tell these wonderful stories in the Star Trek and Star Wars universe, right? Jon Favreau, same thing, made movies with his friends, and then they ended up doing it. There's all of these stories of people who had an idea and had the energy and the knowledge to just have fun, just to do something that they liked or be inspired by and bring it to life. And I think that's, for you, for the people watching, it's like that for everybody here, that's an important thing to hold on to. I was a kid just playing video games and making little movies. I used to do, I wanted to be a Disney animator. So I would always do like cell animation, and I would draw on sheets of paper and want to learn how to do that. And then that died as soon as I joined the industry, because it was like, well, 2D animation's dead, it's all 3D. So I moved into 3D. But for me, it was always like trying to tell the stories. There'll be times when I'm like Zoom calls with vendors and things are going slow, or we're doing a review, and I'll just start drawing a bouncing ball. Like we'll have like we have a system, one of the vendors uses called Frankie, which lets you do frame by frame notes. And so like I'll draw a bouncing ball between frames. So when we play back the shot, the ball's just bouncing in the corner. And I'm like, come on, guys, we need to keep going. But so it's fun, and I think that's the beauty of it all, is just not losing that sense of wonder, that sense of energy, that sense of fun that you would get as a storyteller. And I think Orville, we had Doug Drexler join for season 3, and he's Mr. Star Trek, and he's one of the most wonderful people I've ever met. Such a sweet person. And that's what's great about this show, is that all of the department heads, all of the artists, all the people on it really just wanted to make something fun. And you're doing that now. You're making something fun. And you know what? It's crazy to me that more people aren't having fun and making stuff. And I think, as far as I'm aware, Seth, Tom, everybody has said that, like, they don't ever want to do that thing where they do like a DMC shutdown and shut down fan series or shut down fan shows or anything like that, because that's not who they are. They want to have people create and bring things to life and really enjoy it. And I think that's what the Orville is. The Orville is that beacon of positivity. So
right.
To you and to your creating, keep going, man. Like, have fun. Like, eventually you'll get to a musical episode.
Well,
I
don't mean to cut you off. It's just that for us, it's been a work in progress. It's as a team, having Brian Terranova, having Jace Griffin, having Brian Lessick, having Jim Panetta. Like, I was talking about this recently. It's a forming of a perfect storm, and we're all like learning the ins and outs and all. And we, in the process, we want to have fun. And we hit those bumps in the road because, mind you, we're filming during COVID and all. We're not big budget.
Oh,
and so
I'm aware filming during COVID.
Yeah, and so like I remember keeping Tom abreast on, like, yeah, we're coming along, and how like episodes, and you're working with everybody's working and everything else. So for us to be able to put this out, and like I've always stated, we're doing this for our love for the Orville. We're doing it as people that love science fiction, that love to tell stories. I can't begin to even tell you the meetings that we've had And again, it's a work in progress. We're still learning little ins and outs. And so to be able to bring all these great people together, my cast, everyone has been bringing their A game. Again, these are elements of a perfect storm. And it's only because you guys inspired us. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's so much we're learning and everything else. So I love the fact that, and I greatly appreciate the fact that you guys are watching us. Oh, that means a lot to us because we're
no worries.
Oh man.
Well, and I mean, that's why I commented about that on that thread about it. I'm like, it's fun to see how people interpret the universe and bring it to life. Right. I mean, I think it's interesting because the evolution you're going through is the evolution that I would say a lot of television shows that last for a couple of seasons go through, right? Your first time doing it, your first episode, your first bit, you're kind of figuring out what you're trying to say, right? You know what you're trying to say, you know the broad strokes, but you're trying to figure out what the actual narrative is here, right? How do I bring these characters to life for the audience? How do I introduce these characters and how do I make this happen? When you get into your second episode or second season, you start to mature. You'll see even the first season of Orville, like the first few episodes of the Orville were way more comedic, right? And it was only when Claire and Isaac crash land on the planet and lose the kids that's when there's a tone shift that started to happen in season 1, right? Because you see these characters who are normally pretty lighthearted go through something that's very serious and very concerning. And from there on, the show starts to slowly change. When season 2 kicks in, that kind of keeps moving, right? You start to see the maturation of not only how we tell the story, what it looks like, what the visual effects look like, what the uniforms and so forth look like. I mean, in season 2, you'll see like the new uniforms, badges and things come in a couple episodes in, right? And it's a it's an interesting thing to see the show start to evolve. So as you make your project, you have started to evolve. You're going through that same process. Every time it's like, okay, it's not that you're trying to one up yourself so much as you're finding yourself. It's like they say, to become a master at something, you need to spend thousands, 10,000 hours or something at it. It's that practice makes perfect adage. It's trying to, once you figure out what you're trying to do, then you get a little better at telling it. It gets easier, it goes faster. And I think that's, for the most part, what ends up happening with things. Season 3 of this show, I think, is where we've taken that progression to the next level and found even more so where the voice of the Orville as a show wants to go. And I think it's, as you get to episode 3, you're going to do the same. So it's a cool thing.
So Brandon, I want to thank you for being on the show. And I want to thank all of you out there for joining us for this very insightful episode. We're going to be bringing Brandon back on the show. And if you like what you saw, please hit like, subscribe, tell your friends and family about this show, and make sure you support season 3 of the Orville, which is coming to Hulu. So make sure you support and make sure you tell your friends, because we got to keep this show going. And like I always end off every episode, make every step you take a planetary one. We'll see you soon.